Okay, here we go. So, basically, I'm making this video today because I made an obligation to some people on a subreddit that I would share my experience whenever I went down to Peru, specifically talking about the elongated skulls. So, the way this all started was there was a subreddit post, I think on the UFO subreddit, that talked about the head of Nefertiti. And I think also we can kind of group in there the head of Akhenaten. I'm pretty sure that those two individuals in Egyptian time or Egyptian lore both had elongated skulls. And so I made a comment on that subreddit that I had been to Peru and I had had some experience being close up with the elongated skulls. And yeah, I just kind of want to talk about them. I've always wanted to talk about them, so I think this is probably a pretty good idea. Or a good opportunity to talk about them. So first of all, my name is Lucas Eagleton. I own a tattoo studio. We're actually in my tattoo shop right now. And when I tried to record this earlier, my coworker was here and he was tattooing. It's going to be probably a lot easier that I do it after hours. So it's kind of late, but I'm going to really try my best to kind of talk about my trip, talk about the differences and similarities in, I would say, modern homosapien skulls and these specially elongated skulls, either called Paracas skulls. I've heard them called Homo capensis or even Homo Paracas. So I also want to include, I am an artist by trade. I don't have any credentials as far as I'm not an archaeologist. I'm not an osteologist. I'm not a forensic scientist. I went to school for art. I have an undergrad in printmaking. One thing it did do was inform me a lot on different cultures, especially different cultures through artwork. So I tend to have a really visual lens whenever I look at these things. And I think that kind of helps me, I don't know, make my mind and create informed decisions about what I see. So please, whenever we talk about this, like, I'm just going to say nothing I say is fact. Go research it all yourself and decide for yourself what you believe based on what you've educated yourself on. So I just want to talk about my enthusiasm for this. I'm going to use really loose examples and explanations because I don't know the names of all these different bones and muscles and stuff like that. But I'm a man of the people, so let's just go with that. I'm just an enthusiast, and I just love this stuff. It's cool, and I also do seek to educate myself. But I am not trying to, I would say, necessarily educate anybody else other than just kind of letting people know what I've experienced. So I love to explore. I do a lot of traveling. I probably have hundreds of hours of video of megalithic sites and other really interesting things. So maybe if, this videos kind of go off, I'll share some of my other trips and stuff like that. But let's go ahead and talk about these skulls. Okay, so I went to Peru in 2015 with researcher Brien Foerster. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I wanted to see Machu Picchu. I wanted to see Sacsayhuaman, some of the other like cooler megalithic structures that are there. And I wanted to see some elongated skulls. I didn't know much about them. What I was taught in school was that they were all created through cranial binding or cradle boarding, I think they also call it. So when I went to Peru with Brien Foerster, I feel like I learned, okay, even from my own observations, that there is something different about some elongated skulls than others. And I can say that the way that I feel is I feel like head binding and cradle boarding was kind of a red herring, where I feel like most of us were taught this in school, that in order to get that shape, they bound a child's head usually freshly born, and they put it in a form to kind of create that elongated shape that we see. And I think that's what we get taught in school, and we're like, okay, cool. Yep, that sounds good. Also, there are Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, and only recently did we learn that Neanderthals actually interacted and interbred with Homo sapiens. And, previously we used this as kind of a linear progression. Neanderthals first, Homo sapiens after. And now we have Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, which are the quote unquote hobbit people of Indonesia. And I think we're just learning so much about our history. And we're also realizing that a lot of things were concurrent, right? A lot of things happened at the same time. I feel like I read something a while ago that equated ancient Earth, I would say, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, dawn of civilization, right? Sumerian times. The Earth was a lot more like Middle Earth of Lord of the Rings, where there were different types of people, like visual genetic differences. And that may just be my own wishful thinking, but I think that we've learned that, there's just so many different forms. We're finding different skulls all the time from our ancestors. And some of those might overlap, right? So let's talk about these cool ass skulls. All right. So one thing I wanted to use for kind of a visual representation, I have here a model of a human skull and what we know of a human skull, right? So I think that this is from a woman. I think this is a woman's skull, a human woman's skull, a Homo sapien woman's skull. I think that she might be of Asian descent, but don't quote me on that. I don't know. I think from some of the features on her skull, you might be able to tell. But why don't we just consider this is just a modern human skull, okay? I also have with me another model of an elongated skull. So I got this, I think, after years of having it in my eBay shopping cart. And when I realized how much I love this subject, I finally had to kind of pull the trigger and get one myself. I'm glad I did. It was very expensive for what it is, but honestly, I don't know anybody else that has a cool model of an elongated skull. So the way that I got this, it was on eBay. And unfortunately, I can't tell you a lot of information about where the skull was modeled from. If the skull was a Paracas skull, which I do believe it was, only from visual. I don't really have anything else to go off of there. In fact, actually, in some of these pictures that I might show you, we might find out that this skull was modeled from one of the ones that I took, one of the photos that I took in Peru. But we're going to find out. So I don't know if this is a male or a female, okay? I think that matters as well. This individual looks a little older, only because of lack of teeth. But I want to point out a few things here. There are some really cool significances that are very different than what I would say is a Homo sapien skull. So let's go through some of the images here, and then we can kind of talk about these images and then relate them back to the skulls. So the first image you see here, this is Brien Foerster. She is Brien Foerster's wife, and she did a great job kind of with the connecting of the cultural aspects of what we were seeing. I would say Brien was more so the tour guide as far as the archaeology sites go, and getting the information from, I'd say, either the scholars or the other site guides. But Irene did such a great job at kind of bringing the cultural significance together, and really, I would say, even translating for a lot of these people. So the other man we see here in the white pants, I think is Juan Novato. And I think that he got the collection from the original Julio Teo that found the skulls. Don't quote me on that. I'm working off of memory from 2015, okay? Um, one of the reasons I don't have video to go along with this is sob story. I had a house fire probably maybe 3 months after this trip. And in 2015, I think was the very beginning of cloud storage. And I did not back up my GoPro. I had about 4 gigabytes of GoPro photos and video, which in 2015 was quite a bit. So I lost a lot in that fire. I uploaded them to my laptop, and lo and behold, my laptop also caught on fire. So I'm sorry, I only have what I took on my phone, my cell phone. Thankfully, it's a lot, so I can still go off it. But I really wish I had that supplemental information to give you, and I can't wait for another trip to Peru. So I'm working off a memory here. Just bear with me, okay? So this skull, obviously, I mean, it's still got the skin on it. It's super wild. I mean, I feel like you could probably get some kind of genetic samples from this thing, but if you look, I mean, that skin is pretty dark. So I don't know if through the process of mummification, that's kind of what preserved the skin. I mean, you can even see that like the eyes are covered up. So I'm not sure if it even is still skin, but it's pretty wild. This one's really cool. I just love how large and chunky it looks. One thing that I think is really significant about this skull is the cheekbones, right? The cheekbones, and then this area in particular, right, is not super deep. Like if you look at the human skull, you see these things are really defined, right? They're very sharp edged, very pointy, right? But on this one we look at here, it's very soft and very round, right? Not a lot of, I'd say, forehead indentation. In fact, even on mine, my history, I'm half black, half white. My mom is European, and my dad is, I guess, African immigrants to America during the slave trade. So my mother is of French, German, and British descent. So I definitely have still some of that brow ridge that I got from her. It's interesting that these elongated skulls really don't have that. And I don't know if that's through the process of elongation, or if that's just a genetic aspect of these skulls. So also what you realize is the mandible is large. It's chunky, right? I have on this skull, what you can see is that mandible is very, very large, okay? Now, the mandible is this part of the jaw, the lower jaw, right? And I'm not quite sure if this has a name, this part of the mandible here, but, visually, just check it out, all right? Now, let me go ahead and show you the differences between that mandible and the modern human skull. Excuse me, the modern human mandible. So this one is clearly wider, right? Which means that it could support a lot more musculature, right? A lot more connective tissue. This one is a lot thinner, right? And I think looking at these visually, you could say, okay, well, if you needed to support more muscle, you must have been doing a lot more maybe crushing. That's what I'm gonna surmise here, okay? It's an uneducated guess, but we're just having fun, all right? One thing I think is really significant, and actually after studying this a little bit longer, I'm gonna tell you why maybe I might be off, but one thing I think is really interesting is if you look at the teeth here, see if I can get that in perspective. You look at the teeth here, and they're very spade shaped, right? Now, looking at the teeth here, they almost have these pits, and they're a lot flatter. Also, what you notice here, you can see a bit, these are a little bit more, I would say, what would you even call that? They're facing forward. They're almost rotated, right? If you can see. Now, these here, come on, focus. There we go. they're a lot more kind of shovel-like, and I think they're used a little bit more for tearing. Now, let's go ahead and take the top part of the jaw, and we'll look. Again, we have these kind of spadey shovel type teeth here, right? And they start getting a little broader over here when they get towards the molars, and I think these might be called the premolars. Again, not a dentist. But then we've got this one here, and these are a lot flatter, right? Now, this is a mold. This was taken from a mold. So it's not, in my opinion, not super clean, right? I wouldn't use this for forensics, but we can use it as just a model to kind of talk right now. And if you look, just the flatness of it. Now, one thing I also want to point out is we talked about the kind of the head here, and we've got the temple, and now our jaw muscle goes through our cheekbone here, and it connects to the side of our heads. Yeah. One thing that's interesting is we have these holes, right? We have these holes on the side here so that the muscle can go through. And you can see how big they are. Now compare that to that of a Paracas skull. Excuse me, here. It's probably a lot better to look at it that way. Look at these. So, I mean, you can see the light coming through there, and then look at that. I mean, that is massive, right? To me, that doesn't signal a change outside of biology, right? As far as an artificial deformation of the skull. That looks built in. It looks like it had to be made that way. Looks, right? Uneducated over here. It just looks that way. So I'm sure if I had some more information, I'd probably know a lot more about how to kind of decipher the differences between these skulls. But, you know, just me being a visual artist, I just kind of noticed these differences, and they definitely spark curiosity. And I'd love to know more. So to me, that also signals, okay, let's go ahead and allow a lot more muscle connected to the jaw, to the side of the temple. And I would think, if you look at if you look at a gorilla, they have this crest on the top of their head. I'm pretty sure it's called the sagittal crest, okay? And that is used to create more surface area for their jaw muscles to connect to, okay? Now, these obviously don't have a crest at the top of their head. In fact, they're a lot flatter. But they don't really need that because the skull itself is long enough really to support that. And so it just clips right on to the side of the head here, right? The muscle goes through there, connects to the jaw, and now you're able to smash, right? Pretty cool. I've always thought that was pretty interesting. And it's something that I've always kind of want to talk about and find out more information about. I don't know if you guys know anybody that could possibly watch this video and confirm or deny or educate. I would love that. That sounds awesome. Let's keep going. So I love this skull so much. It's really unique. I really like the underbite that it has. So much so that I actually got it tattooed on my hand. I am a tattoo artist, and this is my passion outside of tattooing. So why not, right? Okay, so this image I really love because you look at the back of a regular homosapien skull, right? And we don't see a lot of separation. We see this squiggle line here, right? This suture on the back, but we don't see many individual bones that have kind of been highlighted. I'm going to call them islands. Now, I think the term for these is Inca bones or Ica bones, because I think they find a lot of the Inca of Peru have these kind of extra bones here, right? But for the sake of conversation, let's call them islands. So we see this here. We don't have a lot here, but on this photo, I mean, there's plenty of them, and they're very beautiful. They almost remind me of like a, I don't know, like an ammonite fossil or something like that. Like the way they tessellate, right? The way that they break into smaller shapes and they kind of repeat themselves. It's just so cool. I think that's something definitely to highlight on these skulls that's very different from our skulls. So this is Brien kind of explaining probably the top suture area, and doing a pretty good job at it. But one thing that I really want you to pay attention to is this skull in the back. So if we look at this skull in the back, I love this one. You can see the jaw right here, the upper and lower. It's quite deteriorated, but it's deteriorated because of old age, right? It shows us that this person was very old by the time they died. And one thing I love right here is this hole right in the skull. A really cool thing to notice is that a lot of cultures practice this this practice called trepanation or trepanning. And what that involves is we don't really know the reasons why they did it. We can surmise that possibly if you were a warrior and you went to battle and you got a head injury and you had some swelling of the brain, maybe this is something that they did to essentially kind of relieve swelling in the brain. We're not 100% sure on that. One thing we do know, though, is if they survived after they had this procedure. And one way that you can tell is there's actually bone growth around the hole. I mean, not to mention, this person's old as hell, you can tell. But I don't think that they got this operation when they were old. I think that they got this operation earlier, probably a while before they died. And they had enough time to actually have some bone growth there. So it's just so remarkable to me that an ancient culture did this, and they did it quite often. Like when you look at the rest of these skulls, you see this all the time, and it's really astounding. So, the ancient practice of trepanation or trepanning. So he's putting this back. You can see, I mean, there's just loads of these things in this cabinet here. Okay, so this is a really cool example, and there is a difference in the skull that he has versus the skull that I have. Now, I'm pretty sure that this thing is called the sagittal suture, right? We have this suture here, which I think is the parietal suture, and it goes over the forehead like that, right? So we can tell this person had it too, okay? Parietal suture. But this is the sagittal suture, similar to where the sagittal crest would be on a gorilla, maybe even an orangutan or even a chimpanzee, but they're most prominent in gorillas. Now, one thing that's interesting is a lot of these Paracas skulls, or the genetic ones that I think are genetic and not artificially elongated, they did not have that suture. Why? Why didn't they have that suture? I mean, it's just so interesting to me, and that's a very big biological difference, and it's not something to me that I can even think of could be artificial. Now, I will tell you, this skull, for whatever reason, has one. However, as you start to turn, it starts to disappear. Now, in homosapien skulls, it goes all the way to the back, okay, and connects this kind of parietal suture here. And this is what he's showing us here. It's just quite remarkable that these skulls are they're smooth. Like when you see them, I mean, look at this thing. Let's see. It is smooth, right? It's like it's been polished. I don't ever want to own these skulls, right? I kind of, it's creepy owning somebody else's skull to me. I'm sure that if I was in another profession or if I had a collection of these, I could get past it, but it's a person. That's a person. And I still want to respect these individuals as people. And, the way that these skulls were found, from what I have been told, was out of respect. It was more of a sequestering to keep from looters and other things like that. Now, that's the story that we're told. It could be completely different, but just keep that in mind. I think all of these were gathered out of respect. Yeah, and I just kind of want to feel the same way. Okay, also check this out. So this one right down here, boom, hole in the head. Also missing tons of their face. So who knows? They might not have lived through this one because it looks still pretty jagged around. That might have done him in. So anyways, let's keep going. Here's such a better angle of this. And this woman back here, I won't say her name, but she was a dentist. Her and her husband were dentists. And, you know, I think I pointed something out about the dentition about it, and they didn't find it, as far as I know, out of the ordinary. And what I was going to tell you is when I was looking at the differences and similarities between these two mandibles here, I was realizing that this person over here could be much older than this person and could have possibly worn down these spades to where they now look like these nubs over here, okay? I want to leave that out for possibility. Like, it's totally possible that that's what happened, and there's nothing really significant other than just age and maybe granular foods. But I tend to think that the teeth are different. I mean, even on the top and the bottom, they just look structured for more grinding and crushing rather than gnashing and tearing. So keep that in mind. And if someone can kind of clear that up for me, that would be amazing. So this dude, I love this dude. He's got a freaking comb over. He's still got his hair. A lot of these Paracas skulls had red hair, okay? And from what I have read, this is not an effect of age. This is not an effect of any kind of chemical process. The hair is red. And I think they also find blonde hair. The guy next to him, I say guy colloquially, it could be a woman, okay? I'll leave it out. I won't misgender these skulls, right, out of respect. So this individual, we'll call them individuals or something like that, over here on the left has just a mop, right? Another cool view of these comb overs. Here's the awesome mop. And what's so cool is look at these like plaits in the hair. You know, this looks like a hairstyle. But also, I mean, look, the skin is still on this skull. It's beautiful and wild. And also, look at those teeth. Look at that. Like, they are flat. So again, I mean, I kind of stand by what I was saying. How interesting is that, right? Like, the diet seems different. Again, here's the other view of basically what's on my hand. Love this skull. Okay, this one is really interesting too. So there weren't just elongated skulls in this museum. They were bilobal. 2 lobes, bilobal. As far as what I have been told, I think that this was an artificial transformation. But you can also see that this suture in the back, because they have a mirror, is slightly disappearing. And I don't know if that happens over time. As far as I know, in modern Homo sapiens, that doesn't happen over time. But yeah, it's also cool. I mean, they had many different types of structures of hair. Of skulls. Here's another one. Not sure if one's elongated. This one's really cool. You can clearly see an elongation. Oh, and one thing I really want to point out. Okay, so our skulls, they have these nubs here, right? Not sure what they're called, but I'm gonna call them little nubs. And these nubs basically attach to our neck muscles right here. See, it goes all the way in the back here. And it allows me to move my big old noggin around, right? If you had a head that is, they say what they claim is anywhere from 25, I've heard it's close to 75%. I don't know if this is true, but let's stick with 25% bigger cranial capacity, okay? You would need bigger nubs to kind of move this head around. I'll show you on mine. This one doesn't have very big ones, right? And I think that's significantly interesting because, again, I don't know if this one is artificial or natural. It looks, I don't know. I really can't, I can't figure it out. But the one in the photo we've got here has very, very large nubs, so that it could hold, I think, support a larger capacity. Yeah, and also it's got, this thing has a massive jaw. And I mean, just look at those pockets where the teeth sit as well. They just look so much more sturdy for some reason to me. So cool. Also, look, check this out, right? It's got a suture. Like, I'm actually just realizing this, and I don't know if this is something that disappears with age, but it has a suture up front. I don't know what kind of suture that is because this human skull doesn't have one. Clearly, we have the other sutures, but this skull that I have pictured does not have this kind of middle suture, nor does this Paracas skull here. So, I mean, that's, I don't know. What is that? It's super cool. And also, look, I mean, just look how massive the nose bone and the nose holes are, right? Like, look at this. Very skinny, right? Very slender, kind of that classic looking tropey skull that we see all the time. This one has its septum either punched out or minusculed, which I think is very interesting. But this one we have pictured here, I mean, just look at the cavities there. You know, it looks like maybe you could use that to have better air intake capacity. I'm also into cars, right? So this is their air intake. You know, it helps their engine breathe better. But yeah, I find that so fascinating. This one, again, is missing that suture. Also super smooth. It has that really kind of robust jaw here, and also those really kind of smooth features, but also very prominent temple dips, right? To kind of let that muscle get up in there. Okay, this is really cool. Does this one have it? I don't think it does. This could be because of the mold, but a lot of these skulls, first of all, this one's missing that kind of suture that goes back, but a lot of these skulls had these holes in them. They're for, as far as I know, they are basically for extra veins or nerves or something to kind of feed the skull. But it's interesting to me that this one doesn't have those, right? And also, I don't really know how that would structurally work. I mean, what's coming out of there? What's going in there? Why do they have these holes for these nerves? Or, what are these holes in their skulls? And a lot of them have them, and it's two right in the back. So here we are, kind of looking at the sutures or the lack thereof, especially on this one where it's kind of disappeared. I would say this is what you call a bilobal skull. And this one, I would say, looks artificially deformed, but also the suture is grown over. Like, it's almost disappearing over time. I don't know if some maybe genetic groups have that and some others don't, but really cool, really significant to me. So this one still has all the skin on its head, and even some hair that you can see. We've got a cool whole collection of these, and they're all different, and I absolutely love that. I mean, this one here, again, it has these holes in the back of its skull, but it still has the suture. And then we go over here. This one doesn't have the suture, but it has the holes in the skull. So I don't know what to make of that. Super freaking cool. Okay. Now, I want to kind of point something out here. And this is definitely a tangent, but I would love to make another video on this, okay? Do you see these like tapestries, in the back? They look really interesting to me. And I think I probably took better pictures of them and more pictures of them with my GoPro while I was there. But this is basically what I have to work with. And I think it's really interesting because this thing to me here looks like a lot of what we'd recognize. A lot of people call them baboons, but there's actually a difference between baboons and mandrills. A mandrill is a primate that lives, I think, primarily in Africa. And it has those big yellow teeth and that kind of blue and red snout around the face. Baboons don't have that. They have similar construction, but they are mostly brown. So I think it's really cool. This thing looks like a mandrill to me. I don't want to go off topic here, but I think this definitely deserves kind of another. And also, like, I mean, look at the heads on the bottom of the legs here, and then the head that it's carrying. Yeah, interesting to say the least. Also, this guy back here, I've got a lot to say about this as well. Like I said, time for another video, but let's move on. Okay, so again, you know, we've got, I think this is just a regular Homo sapien skull here, and I think we use this as comparison for the elongated skulls, okay? Just kind of go through some of these. I love this because, I mean, they're all lined up. They're all different. You know, what's this one about? Was it in the process of being elongated? You know, did it have maybe a few genetics from the ones that were genetically elongated? I don't know. It looks like it has a lot more modern features of modern Homo sapiens. Facial features seem a little sharper. You know, it still kind of has a robust jaw, especially in comparison to the rest of its skull. But, you know, you can tell it's got this little protrusion here. You know, was this after it was born, or was this some kind of intermixing between the two types of humans? I'm not quite sure. Super cool. Also, I mean, look at the bottom, and this might not be of any significance, but this thing is called, what I know is called the foramen magnum. And this is where your basically brainstem comes through and your spine connects to your freaking skull, right? And this one, yeah, let me hold them the same way. This one is definitely a little bit in a different position than this other foramen magnum. And I know that on what they deem genetically elongated skulls, that foramen magnum is pushed a little bit further back on the skull here in order to support the balance of the skull, right? Whereas ours might be a little further forward, right? Because our brains sit maybe a little bit directly on top of our necks, and they're actually, yeah, actually you can see here, it's back here, right? This guy is a little bit more in the middle. Again, sorry for calling it a guy. I'm just kind of used to doing that. I'll try not to. Here's another kind of array here. I took a panorama, so that's why these look super weird in the background. You know, when people move in the background of panoramas, it makes them look like like caterpillars or something like that. But yeah, I was trying to get a really cool view of these. Again, I'm an artist, so I'm trying to take these cool artistic shots. This one's cool. I just really like the prominence of this kind of like ocular area. Again, same skull with that kind of suture up front. Super cool. You know, these teeth here, they're just so much different than what we have. Another view of some of these like Inca bones in the back. Some of them don't have them. You know, some of them are smaller, some of them are larger. I mean, like, can you imagine a population with so many different shaped heads, like walking around? And there's no proof that any of these skulls were around the same time. They could be hundreds of years from each other, right? I think the oldest one is around 3,000 years old, if I remember correctly. 3,000 years. God, 3,000 years. I mean, I am almost 37. 37 years. 3,000 years? It's almost inconceivable. But how cool. Inca bones right back here. On this one, no suture. Suture here. This one's got, you could even say, 3 different holes in the back of its skull, right? That are prominent. I mean, I can see some other ones here, but I mean, wild. Okay, this skull was really weird. Okay. This looks to me what is very common looking with hydrocephaly, right? Where they used to say it was water on the brain. And hydrocephaly means hydro, water, and cephaly, skull, right? So to me, this looks like kind of a classic case of hydrocephaly. And I don't know how old this individual would have been, but they look very young from what I can tell, because I think that these kind of sections are a lot more prominent on fetal skulls than they are on fully developed. But from what I think we were told is that this was a fully developed, grown human being. I don't know. Take that as you will. So I will say that, this looks very interesting to me, right? Now, the eyes look a lot, the orbital kind of cavities just look a lot more distended and elongated. But there were pieces missing of the skull, and we did have the pieces, and we were fitting it together. And I will tell you that I did help. Okay, I'm going to take credit. I figured out where the piece went. Okay, and I say that because I have spent a lot of time drawing skulls for tattoos and looking at skulls. Okay, so I can kind of identify the shapes and the areas just through repetition and drawing. So check this out. So we've got a little piece here, as you can see, and they're kind of trying to move it around. To me, I felt like this was very clear, okay? I felt like it was very clear. You don't ever really want to be the first one that jumps out and goes, I know what it is, but I felt like it was very clear to me, and I think that you guys will understand too. This little L form right here is, to me, the classic form of the nose, right? And I recognized it almost immediately, right? Now, I can understand if you can't immediately recognize that, okay? But I felt like I knew exactly where this thing went as soon as I saw this bone piece. And I knew that it wasn't the way that the skull was back in this picture is not how this person lived, right? We've got parts missing here. So as we kind of piece it together and figure it out, ooh, bing, bingo, right there. It lines up perfectly. Unfortunately, I don't think I got a picture kind of in an upright view with that piece on there, but bear with me, So here's a picture of Brien holding this skull. Pretty cool. This one is fascinating to me. I love this one. Okay. The color is due to I think, preservation technique or a sampling technique. It was not intentional, and it is what happened, I think, when they either tried to preserve or they tried to sample the skull. Now, the skull is very unique, okay? Because, first of all, it looks very young. It's very small when you see it, and it is elongated. And it doesn't look like anything was wrapped around the head to kind of create that. It could be in the process, but to me, this thing looked very natural. It's still got hair on it. It's still got skin, right? Check out also the teeth, okay? The teeth are so cool to me because, I mean, they are huge. There's not a lot of them, and they're very prominent. They also don't look like baby teeth, okay? Like, they just don't look like any baby teeth I've ever seen. You can say I'm wrong and you can show me otherwise, and I'll totally believe you, if this is your specialty. But from what I can see, these here, I mean, are very unique. They're very broad, and it feels like there's a lot less than in a common mouth, right? I'm just saying that based off of visual. I mean, look at it. It's huge, right? When you look at that compared to the eye sockets, it is large, okay? So cool. I mean, look at the elongation. And it totally could be artificial, right? Especially with that kind of like, there's almost like an indentation there. But I mean, there's so many cool aspects about this skull that I really love. I mean, here are the teeth. Look at those, right? Look how small this mandible was, and look how large these teeth are in comparison. And if you want another kind of example to look at ours, you can kind of see our teeth are way smaller, and there's a lot more that fit. This individual did not have as many teeth as we had. And they're large. This skull is small, so it could be, I don't know. This is really cool to me. Take a couple more views at this thing. There's the bottom mandible. Let's check it out. So we can see that these had teeth like ours, right? At least the shape of them, but the amount, do we have the same amount? Let's count them. Okay, so we have, I think, four teeth in the front, right? And that's what we've got here. 4 teeth in the front. But then, here, I'll hold it like this maybe so we can actually see the difference. And this camera tracks my eyes, so I apologize if it's not focusing all the time. But I'm super new to this, so please have patience with me. But you can even see the shape of the mandible is different too, right? Look at these. And I could be wrong, but I feel like we might be missing some. Now, I know some indigenous populations don't have wisdom teeth, okay? Indigenous populations in Mexico and indigenous Mexicans. From what I've read, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the case. So maybe the amount of teeth isn't so spectacular, but I'm just like, those look like fully grown teeth to me. I mean, they look huge. They're so cool. Love this skull. Okay, so this is me with the man. Here's a little proof that I was there, okay? I'm super hippied out at the time. I hadn't shaved in a while. Was really feeling it. So this is me with the man, Juan Navarro, and I was super happy to have met him. And he has now since passed, which is kind of unfortunate because whenever we were there, that very first picture, he was telling us a story of the skulls, okay? And it was a traditional story. It wasn't a scientific story. It was something that seemed like more of an oral story that was passed down over time. And it was really cool. It was very topical, but I won't go through it here. But yeah, unfortunately, I had that whole thing recorded. I had him telling the story. I had the translation of the story. But maybe if I ever go down there again, I can get like maybe a retelling from Irene or something like that, because I'm sure she's heard it many times. But yeah, that can be something for another video. Okay, so that concludes our time at the Paracas Museum, okay, in Ica, Peru. Now, on the trip, we went to a few more museums. Some were in, I think, Cuzco, Lima, and then places in between. At this place we stopped, which I'm pretty sure was on the way to Cuzco, it had this really cool skull with these super long dreadlocks. And now I've actually done a whole art piece based on this image here. And the funny thing is the art piece is probably about 7 foot tall. And it's just the skull, maybe less than that. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm way overestimating, about 5 foot. It's 5 foot long and I think maybe about 2 feet wide. And the hair does not fit into it. And I feel like I should have made it at least 7 feet to encompass how long this person's hair was because I wanted to do it justice. But how cool is this image? Like, if anybody wants a tattoo of this, I'd totally do it. Anyways, so in this museum, which I'm sorry I'm blanking on where this museum is. I'm telling you, 10 years ago, a lot has happened. And since I don't have any video and I didn't take any, I guess, on my phone, I don't have any reference for it. So these obviously had numbers on them. They had been studied, they had been tracked, but there is some really cool significance about these skulls, okay? So typical kind of elongation. Also, like, no sutures to be seen in this crappy photo, like none, right? You have this kind of cracking, which I think is more due to over time and preservation, but like, how freaking cool is that? I don't know if they just heal together or what. Now, one thing I want to tell you is I was told that the Paracas people were killed off by the Nazca people. Now, I have listened to a podcast recently with Ed Barnhart. I think it's called Archaeo Ed is the podcast. And Ed Barnhart is absolutely fascinating. The dude is a genius when it comes to archaeology and anthropology. Check out his podcast if you can. But he says that the Paracas people lived contemporarily with, or at the same time with, the Nazca. Actually, excuse me, no, I got that wrong. He says that the Paracas people were the predecessors of the Nazca. So the genetic predecessors of the Nazca. So they died out, and then the Nazca came after them. From this tour, I was told that they were contemporaries. They lived at the same time. Do your own research. Again, really cool questions to ask. One reason why Brien feels like they were contemporary, which he may have changed his thoughts on this, is because they were often seen with ropes. These elongated skulls were seen with ropes through their skulls, okay? And a lot of that time, especially on these murals, you can tell that they were trophy skulls, or used as trophies or used as charms. So I think maybe this is his own kind of assumption that they were systematically hunted and killed by the Nazca because of maybe cultural reasons or, religious, any kind of reason that you might, I guess, hunt down and kill somebody else. I don't know. So this one's really cool because you can tell how old it was just by the degradation of the jaw itself. And one thing I really love about this one that's very different from the one that I have, okay, is, these are called orbitals, and this is where your eyeballs sit, right? These orbitals are massive, right? Look how much of the skull they take up. The ones on this, they call this a chongo skull. That's right. And luckily it's written at the top. Tumba, which means tomb, number 60 in Chongos. So I think maybe Chongos is another region in Peru. But you can tell here, this right here, look at this on our skull, okay? This is where your ocular nerve comes through. And the way that I view it and look at it is this is where all the information from your eye passes into your brain, okay? Now, this is my own assumption, okay? Own assumption. But I think these guys had massive ocular cavity holes so that they could have an ocular nerve that connected from their eye to their brain of a larger capacity, right? I think it's really similar in the way that we look at electronics, right? If you are trying to charge your electric car, the cable on that is massive because the dumping of energy from your power source into your electric car needs to be so massive. I like to think the same about this, right? The information in here that you're undertaking has got to be just so gargantuan that you need these ocular nerves to kind of transfer that energy. What does that mean? I don't know. Maybe they could see in the dark. Maybe they could see colors that we can't see. Maybe they had more cones and rods than we have in order to get more information from their surroundings. These are all guesses, okay? But I'd like to think that they're educated based on what we're looking at here. So really cool skull. So again, another view of those ocular cavities. I mean, look at that. Look how big these guys are, and look how big the ones in the photo. I mean, they're just, it's so cool. And this person was super old too. Like, you know, what if it was like a granny or a grandpa? I mean, just the wisdom I'm sure that this person accumulated throughout their life is astounding to me. It's just so cool. This guy's pretty gnarly looking. This person is pretty gnarly looking. This obviously says from deformation, typical of Paracas, necropolis. So basically, this came from a gravesite in the Paracas region. This person also had a suture that went from here to there, which I think is really interesting. I love this one, okay? If you're sensitive to this type of stuff, I probably should give a warning at the very beginning of this video, and I will. But this person still has their nose and lips attached. Sometimes this one really freaks me out because when I stare at it long enough, I feel like I can like create the person's face in my mind when I look at it. It's just so cool. I mean, I could gush over this thing forever, but Cultura Paracas, so part of the Paracas culture. Another one I think of similar to the one that we looked at earlier. This is a really great side view of this. I've used this one for some art as well, but look at that mandible. Look at that thing, man. It's so freaking thick compared to what we got. And the cavity here, right, where the cheekbone is just so prominent and large. You know, just really supporting that muscle and connective tissue to the side of the skull. Okay, so I don't see this one as elongated, but what it does have is it does have this rope here that's tied to the side of the cheekbone. And this is indicative, especially this right here. I think these were things that were like kind of put into the eye sockets, but this is indicative that this thing is probably carried around as a trophy, which is pretty gnarly because it wasn't carried around skull only. It was carried around with the face still attached to it. Super duper gnarly. Yeah. And I don't know how much more I can really say about that. I mean, if you look here, it has a hole right through its skull. Maybe that's indicating on how this person passed, but yeah, all I can really say is super gnarly. No disrespect. Okay, here are some other ones. This was from a museum in Cusco. So this is very far from the Paracas region, which they call the Altiplano, right? The high plain, which used to be a seabed until the sea receded even lower, okay? That's Paracas. So the Paracas area is now a desert. I do not believe that it was always a desert, and primarily when these people are around, because they often made pictographs of whales and like seals and crustaceans and other sea creatures. So, you know, unless they were all living lower down by the coast, I'm pretty sure that the sea level was a lot higher when these people are around, and that's kind of where they lived. But this one here is from Cusco, and it does have this suture in the front. Again, I can't account for that. I don't really have any information for that. Super unique. So this one here doesn't have a suture. It's right next to the one that does, but it doesn't. This one's a lot smoother, as you can see. This one's a lot rougher. I really don't know the difference. I don't know if that's due to preservation. It's just super cool. One thing I also want to point out too is if you look at this temples here, right? These kind of flare out on this skull in particular a little bit more, right? they are a little shallow here. These are a lot more indented, and they have these kind of lines up here, which could be indicative on where the muscle connected to the skull. Again, don't quote me on that. It's just something cool that I noticed, and I could be wrong. Now, we finally got to this one here. This one is called the Huayqui skeleton. And I think that's spelled Huayqui, or Huayqui, Huayqui, okay? And they say that this thing was a fetal individual. But look at the teeth. Do you think that they were fetal, or do you think that maybe they were... I don't want to use the word deformed because I think it's just not right. But do you think that maybe they were, we'll call it, non, maybe like not typically formative? What's a good way to say that with respect? Anyways, they look a lot different than modern humans, and other, I would say, fetuses that we've seen. This is claimed to be a fetal skeleton. I think maybe the one over here on the left was the fetal skeleton because of the arms here that you can see and the way it is, but it could have also just been a child. So this one here seems to me like it was a child, that possibly you can still see this this opening here in the skull, which I can't remember the name of this, but it was the opening in the skull. It basically doesn't close until you're a certain age, right? When babies develop on the inside, one of the reasons why humans don't carry their babies for as long as, say, elephants do, which I think is like 2 years, don't quote me on that, but ours is 9 months. We know that. And a lot of our developing happens on the outside. And that's because you need to get the skull through the woman's pelvis, right? It needs to pass through the pelvic hole, okay? And it does that by being able to deform slightly whenever it comes through. And that's why we have this opening here, because the skull isn't fully formed and fully bonded. So I think that's how we can tell how young this individual was, right? And you can see here their skull is falling apart, right, at the seams. But also, look at those teeth. Those teeth do not look like children's teeth to me. I might not know. I don't have children. But from what I've seen, they do not look like a child's teeth. And it looks like a much further along development. But also, look how large the eye sockets are. I mean, they are enormous. I mean, even compared to this elongated skull, which could be artificially elongated. But, compared to this one, I mean, they are massive. Now, over to the left, I think we have what we would term as a bilobal skull. And, some of these, I've been told, the artificial transformations can be due to, say, status. Maybe there were different classifications of people, and at the time where they were doing artificial deformation, they did that by kind of creating different skull forms for different statuses. I think that is one theory. I'm not quite sure. I love the Huayqui skeleton. It just is so cool. I mean, it's got ribs and everything, It doesn't have the full body. It doesn't have hands. We've been seeing these mummies recently, and some do have elongated skulls that have hands with 3 fingers. Now, I think the jury's still out, right? They've done tests on these. I don't know whenever I will feel confident that I truly believe that these were, biologically different, like humanoid forms on this earth. I don't know what's going to make me feel that way. I don't have the same degrees that these people that are studying these things do. I don't have the same knowledge and information. So at some point you have to have faith in kind of what you hear from people that know way more than you. So I'm open to that. I'm very open to that, and I would love to know more. So if someone sees this and they do know more and they want to send information my way, I would absolutely appreciate that. Here's me. I just had to feel like I had to include this. This is me at the wall of Sacsayhuaman. I think this is the biggest stone in this wall, and you can compare that to me. I'm about 6'1", so the stone is giant, and also you're not seeing the entire length of the stone. This stone actually goes into the ground, I think maybe 30% more, right? At least for a base. So I don't know how much this thing weighed. It was huge. I mean, look at the angles in that wall. I'm just like, it's put together like a puzzle piece. My mind is blown. I'm still fascinated in this. How freaking cool, right? So awesome. Yeah. I think this was some tea that I got in Peru. Um, it felt great. It made me feel awesome. You know, just some tea leaves in there. There was some things that were happening. I remember some people would use these tea leaves and they would put baking soda on these tea leaves and put them back in their mouth to give them more energy. It catalyzed the energy of these tea leaves. Um, a very cultural thing in Peru. But yeah, they really loved tea. So, anyways, thanks for listening to my presentation here. I told people that I was going to get this out in like a week. It took me, I guess, by the end of this week. And obviously, as you can tell from this video, it's still pretty rough. So I think I'm going to keep it pretty rough just for the information. But yeah, I really hope that you guys enjoyed this. I hope that if someone sees this video and has anything else to add, they absolutely will. Feel free to contact me. I would love to have more conversations about this. And I have so much more to talk about, especially with Peru and megaliths. I have so many more pictures. This was 74 of my probably several hundred pictures that I still have from Peru. Unfortunately, it's not of my thousands of pictures that I would have had I not had the house fire, but life happens to everyone. And unfortunately, that happened to me. But I can still go back and still get more, and I cannot wait to go back and go get more. And I would love to go with another researcher. I would love to go with somebody else who's interested in this and could have more to add. I am always down to learn, and I love travel. So thank you again. I don't know if you like this, and if I have a YouTube channel by this point, maybe like and subscribe or something if that's what they do and say. But again, thank you for listening to me and taking the time to kind of hear me out. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and I hope to make another one soon.